Hi, this is Dr. Chandler. Welcome to your course video notes on cognitive psychology. It's a good idea to print the hard copy provided to add your own notes as you view these videos. Each video will include an assignment or a quiz. Now, let's begin. Thinking is an active, not a passive process. Learning is due more to external than to external factors. In other words, what you do with the information yourself is much more predictive of your learning than what the teacher does externally, such as whether the teacher provided notes or how long the notes are displayed. Thinking is an active, not a passive process. We must actively relate new information to our existing store of knowledge rather than attempting to memorize or rehearse information. Relate information to your existing knowledge as you see these students doing. Metacognition means thinking about thinking. And metacognitive thinking is much lower in children. For example, even if a child gets an answer correct, the child may have difficulty explaining how he arrived at the answer. Metacognition is the awareness and the understanding, or not, of our own thinking processes. Metacognition requires us to actively think about what we are doing, why we are doing it, and what we are learning from doing it. Metacognition is about being able to successfully plan, monitor, and evaluate our own learning. Kinds of thinking fall along a continuum from algorithms to heuristics. An algorithm is a process of elimination. It's slow with few errors. Perhaps you recall using algorithms in geometry. Algorithms are a step-by-step methodological procedure, while heuristics, on the other hand, involve little thinking and are speedy with many errors. We use heuristics most often, though, because our heuristic figuring is usually close enough and in most circumstances suffices, given our daily time constraints. We are cognitive misers and would rather make easy and quick assumptions than to think situations through for a careful and correct analysis. Remember that we cannot passively absorb information like a sponge. Recognition means to identify previously learned information. Because recognizing someone's name from a list of names is easier, we generally prefer multiple choice questions with potential responses available to choose from than essay questions. Recall means the retrieval of information into conscious awareness, like an essay question where you have a blank page and must recall everything you know about a person with just their working title. Learning is determined more by internal than external factors. External factors such as how the information is displayed or how long you're exposed to information is really not as important as how you organize and think about the information in relation to your existing knowledge. Let's focus for a minute on sensation and perception. When sensory stimulation is encoded into neural pathways, we recognize these messages as our sensations. Sensations are food or nourishment for our brain. The most punishing experience for humans is to be placed in solitary confinement, where we have an absence of sensory stimuli. In sensory deprivation chambers, one's brain will create sensory hallucinations to keep our neural networks active and alive. Our neural system is like our muscles that will atrophy and die if they are not used. Perception is the process through which sensations, now neural messages, are interpreted or given meaning in terms of our previous experiences. This is also called meaning making. Can you list your senses? How many are there? If you answered 5 and listed seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, you are wrong. We have at least 7 senses, and I am not including seeing dead people. What are these senses? Well, if you said seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, you were right, but you also needed to add vestibular and proprioception. Vestibular contributes to balance and spatial orientation. Vestibular provides much of the contribution about movement to your neural system. The vestibular system is within the labyrinth of the inner ear. The vestibular system sends signals to neural structures that control eye movements and to the muscles that keep us upright. The vestibular system integrates all of our other senses. If a child has difficulty learning to read, the child might need to play more on the playground to prime the vestibular pump. Activities such as swinging, sliding, the merry-go-round all help the senses to become integrated. The proprioceptive sense is composed of information from sensory neurons located in the inner ear, motion and orientation, and in the receptors located in our muscles and joints. We have specific receptors for pressure, light, temperature, sound, and other sensory experiences. Proprioception is the ability to sense stimuli arising within the body regarding position, motion, and equilibrium. Even if you are blindfolded, you know through proprioception where you have your arms and legs positioned. A drunk test is designed to measure proprioception. Let's look at this information processing model in more depth. Sensory memory is the process of all of your senses working together that are attending to any given stimuli. Sensory memory holds this stimuli or information almost photographically for less than a second. The information stimuli that is most relevant to you is encoded. Encoding works with sensory memory to become short-term or working memory. Encoding memory holds fewer bits of information, but for minutes versus nanoseconds. The information that you attend to, process by encoding, and then practice gets into storage. Storage for long-term memory is your permanent and limitless storehouse of memories. Although we all experience some difficulty retrieving stored information from our long-term memory without creating some kind of systematic card catalog method to assist with retrieval. Here is the information processing model of memory. What do we mean when we talk about memory? Memory is the persistence of learning over time via encoding, storage, and retrieval. In this theory, encoding is transforming information into a form that can be stored in memory, and processing of information into our memory system. Storage is the maintenance of encoding of information over time, and the process of keeping information in memory. Retrieval means bringing to mind information that has been stored in our memory. The process of getting information out of memory storage depends on retrieval cues, moods, and motives. Let's see how the information processing model works with an actual experience. You are experiencing an event. Let's say walking into the parking lot to find your vehicle and drive home. The colorful shapes represent all the bits of information that your sensory memory is processing. The air temperature, the colors and kinds of vehicles, individuals you may see and recognize. What makes it into sensory memory, remember, is only the information in your environment that you actually attend to. Perhaps you are very hungry and you are concentrating on the sensory stimuli from your stomach, and you do not notice a friend getting out of a car in the next row. You see in this diagram how some of what you experience makes it into your sensory memory, and some of this information then is encoded. Some of what is encoded makes it to storage. But wait, something is stored from this experience that wasn't actually there. Perhaps you will later remember having talked to your friend as you have on many other days walking to your car. This is the diagram you will need to make and describe for an in-class quiz. For full credit, you will need to show dots for the amount of stimuli in each area in your diagram. Here is a diagram similar to the ones in your text, showing the relationships of sensory memory, attention, short-term memory, practice or elaborative rehearsal, and long-term memory. Again, sensory memory is the temporary holding of sensory information. Attention represents the information that passed through your very subjective attentional gate and is then transferred into short-term memory, which is the brief storage of information while it is being used. If the information is practiced with elaborative rehearsal or other deep processes, this information is then transferred into long-term memory, a relatively permanent storehouse of information. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, also called ADHD, involves inattention, impulsivity, excessive motor activity, and often leads to academic failure and social problems. For example, a 5 or 6-year-old with ADHD averages only 7 minutes at any given activity. This prohibits the information processing system from working properly because the child cannot sort out all of the information as it enters the system, from say the drip, drip, drip of the drinking fountain down the hall to the rustle of the person in the seat beside, or the screeching, scratching of the chalkboard and the droning teacher's voice. Here is a story to explain ADHD and the brain. There was a kingdom with a king who had a great problem. So many peasants of his kingdom were getting into his castle, vying for the king's attention to settle their disputes, large and small, that the king was overwhelmed and couldn't make any decisions at all. The reason he was overwhelmed in his court was because his castle guards were asleep. Many of the neurons in your brain are inhibitory neurons. They act like castle guards, determining what is important enough to get inside the castle to have an audience with the king. This is the reason that stimulants such as caffeine and Ritalin are used to wake up the inhibitory neurons so that they do their job and allow the king to attend to the most important matters. Now we're going to talk about some concepts that you'll need to understand. Reconstruction is your memory of an event or experience, such as the prom you attended, pieced together from a few highlights that you attended to. such as what your date was wearing, the music, and dancing. You pull the bits of information or memories from different areas of your brain and put them back together to reconstruct the experience. Your memory of the prom is most likely missing some pieces of information and including some remembered information that was not present. Schemas are your script or framework for a particular activity or event that shapes what you attend to and will remember from a given event. Schemas are the integrated framework of knowledge and assumptions about people, objects, and events that we each hold. Our memories are consistent with our individual point of view. An example of a schema is the framework of expectations for an event. What comes first, next, and next in this experience, such as at a wedding. Schemas affect how we encode and recall information and may or may not be accurate because puzzling features are adapted to fit our expectations. Would you expect or remember the symbolic breaking of the glass if you were not familiar with the customs of a Jewish wedding? A common error of memory is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias leads us to attend to only what is consistent with our own views. As a result, our views are maintained regardless of the weight of the opposing evidence. Broaden your knowledge base, and you will broaden what you actually sense, perceive, and remember. Again, test yourself before class. Can you recreate this diagram and accurately label and describe each of the 4 parts? For full credit, you will need to show dots to indicate the amount of sensory stimuli in each area of your diagram. This concludes Cognitive Video Notes 1.